Hi everyone, this is Amit Srivastava. Please raise your hand or type a chat in the box if you can't see the slides or you have an issue hearing me. In this day and age, we should have been used to doing these webinars by now, but now that we're doing them almost on a weekly basis with some group or another, there's always some type of logistical thing that comes up, and we're still trying to make sure we get this stuff done perfectly. So my name is Amit Srivastava, and I'm one of the underwriters at the WIFIA program. I started back in January 2017, just before our first round of funding. So I'm one of the guys who has, I would say I have, out of the program, I've been around, not the longest, but I'm one of the I guess the veterans of the program. So I do have some experience, with the rules and requirements and also the benefits of the WIFIA product. So let's start taking through the slides. Let's first start with some housekeeping items. You may call into the webinar by dialing the number shown here and entering the access code. Any questions you guys have, raise your hand or type them into the chat box. And unanswered questions, if there are any, will be followed up by email. The purpose of the session, the goal of this webinar is really to foster a greater understanding of the benefits, which I'm gonna go through in quite some detail later in this presentation. And we do have an LOI submission deadline coming shortly, and I will talk about that a little bit too later. And we want to make sure that when you guys submit your LOIs, you know what you're getting into, and you guys can be prepared to submit LOIs that are competitive. The agenda. We'll do a quick introduction. I'll talk about eligibility requirements for the program, so you guys are ready prior to the LOI submission date. I'll then dig into benefits, and we can go to a Q&A session. Okay, let's get started here. We always like to start with our mission statement, since it characterizes what the program is really seeking to accomplish. And each word in the statement conveys significant meaning. When you look at this mission statement, the words accelerates investments and provides supplemental credit assistance pops out. And the intent here is clear. The program is striving to push projects to completion faster and to provide cost-effective supplemental financing for projects. The terms at the bottom, you'll see national and regional significance. This illustrates another one of WIFIA's key purposes. We provide financing to projects with substantial impact nationally or regionally. The next slide, we have some key dates in the program's history. WIFIA's inception was in 2014 with the passage of the Water Resources Reform and Development Act. In 2017, as I mentioned, we got our first appropriation of $25 million to start issuing loans. Appropriation amount jumped in 2018 to $55 million, allowing us to invite 39 projects. And our appropriations have kind of maintained pretty steadily, with our fiscal year 2019 appropriation reaching $60 million and our 2020 appropriation totaling $50 million. I'm going to skip to the 2020 appropriations item. In fiscal year 2020, we expect to be able to issue $5 billion in loans, and that'll support approximately $10 billion in water and wastewater infrastructure. And we do hope that some of your projects are on that list. And letters of interest for the fiscal year 2020 round, they're due October 15, 2020. And do take a look at our website, and you'll be able to see the letter of interest form. The link here at the bottom is also we'll take you to the site and allow you to download that form as well, so you can fill it out and hopefully submit by the October 15th deadline. So what are the eligibility criteria for the program? Let's take through the key players here. So when it comes to borrowers, it really runs the gamut. It's local, state, tribal, federal government entities, partnership, joint ventures. We have corporates, and then we have SRFs as well. These are the state revolving fund programs. Do note that when it comes to federal government entities, there is a different way of scoring these entities, which affects how much subsidy has to be set aside for these projects. And it's a good idea before, if your LOI is going to include, the borrower is going to be a federal entity, it's a good idea to contact the WIFIA program management team to discuss these details of your project, to make sure there are no issues with how the project may be scored. You want to make sure everything is very clear before you complete the LOI and submit it. Eligible project types, again, it runs the gamut. We're talking about SRF projects, projects that are eligible under the drinking water, clean water programs, enhanced energy efficiency projects, brackish or seawater desal projects, drought prevention, acquisition of property if it's key to the water or wastewater project you're seeking financing for, and we also do combination of projects, provided they are secured by the same revenue pledge, they have the same purpose, geographically they're the same region, and we're talking about a similar time frame for these projects. The next eligibility thing, I'm trying to tick through my slides as well, I'm a little bit delayed here. Eligible project sizes, typically the minimum project size where you'd be eligible for WIFIA loan is 20 million. Now we do make some concessions to smaller communities of 25,000 or less. If your system is serving a smaller community of 25,000 or less, the project size could drop down to 5 million. Eligible costs. These are a variety of different costs, pre-construction and during construction. So things like development phase activities, these are costs associated with things like your rate study, feasibility analysis, environmental review and permitting, design work, of course, construction, rehabilitation work, is eligible. The acquisition of real property, if there is property that is essential to the project, that'll be an eligible cost. For the acquisition will be an eligible cost. Capitalized interest, capital issuance expenses. These are things like the rating letters associated with issuing the WIFIA debt. The reserve funds, if you need to capitalize a reserve when you issue the WIFIA debt, those are eligible costs. And of course, here at the bottom, the WIFIA application fee of $100K and the credit processing fee, which will be invoiced at close to financial close or shortly thereafter, those are eligible costs and could be when you work with the underwriter, you can estimate those costs and include them in your uses of funding. So you can upsize your WIFIA loan accordingly. For federal, we're a federal credit program, so the projects must comply with these federal requirements. And I'm going to touch on the big guys. The project must be NEPA compliant prior to closing, and the key contracts are going to need to include American Iron and Steel and Davis-Bacon requirements. Okay, so now that we've got through the eligibility requirements, so you know what's needed to actually be a borrower, let's move on to financial benefits. And I'm often asked by borrowers that are that have been invited to apply or that are in the application process even, and even by folks like yourselves who are thinking about submitting an LOI. How do we take advantage of all of WIFIA's flexibilities in order to maximize savings? And in the next several slides, I'm really going to tease out the cost savings from each of WIFIA's various features and then summarize what the overall benefits of a WIFIA loan would look like. So WIFIA savings are a function of the program's unique features and flexibilities. So let's do a high-level review of these features, and then we'll dig deeper in subsequent slides. The first thing is interest rate. We provide savings to a very attractive interest rate. The WIFIA loan interest rate tracks yields on U.S. Treasury bonds with a similar maturity. Additionally, when you're looking at the tenor for a WIFIA loan, it's not the length from first disbursement to maturity, which is what many would think. It's actually the weighted average life of the WIFIA loan. It's the average amount of time it takes for a dollar of principal to be paid. So the example I always use is if you have level principal payments over a 30-year period, the weighted average life for such a loan would be approximately 15.5 years. And therefore, the WIFIA loan interest rate for this loan we're talking about would be an interest rate on a 15.5-year Treasury bond plus 1 basis point. And I looked before the presentation. I went to the Treasury yield curves. Such a loan with the 15.5-year weighted average life would be priced at about 1.04%. So you see how this policy allows us to get you guys pretty darn attractive interest rates. Flexible drawdown schedule. During the construction period, costs are incurred at certain milestones. They're not incurred all at once. So why pay interest on funding amounts that aren't being utilized? And the program understands this, and we allow for disbursements to be made after construction costs are actually incurred. And the real advantage here is that you only pay interest on what you're drawing, and it allows you to avoid negative arbitrage. And we're going to talk about this just a little bit later. And note that each of these draws are at the same interest rate. When you close the WIFIA loan, you lock in a rate, and it's the same rate whether you disperse in year 1 or you disperse in year 5. Optional debt service deferral. During the construction period, you have significant outlays to pay for construction costs. Most borrowers do not want to be saddled with debt service during this time. They already have huge cash expenses. And WIFIA allows borrowers to defer debt service through construction and up to 5 years post-construction. And this puts less pressure on ratepayers, and it also allows for your more expensive debt, let's say it's the 51% of funding that WIFIA is supporting. You can pay down that more expensive debt a lot sooner. Long tenor. WIFIA allows borrowers to repay the WIFIA loan over 35 years post-construction completion. So, for example, if your project has a 5-year construction period, we are looking at a loan tenor of up to approximately 40 years. Again, this places less pressure on ratepayers since debt service requirements are going to be spread over a longer period of time, and therefore they're going to be lower. The last 3 features we discussed: long tenor, optional deferral periods, and flexible drawdown schedule, all play a part in the last WIFIA flexibility, which is sculpted repayment schedule. And this is, when you talk about sculpted repayment schedule, it's simply the customization of the debt service, the WIFIA debt service payments, through the life of the loan in order to accommodate things like other issuances, debt issuances, other capital expenditure needs, or to accommodate ratepayers. If you don't want to spike to have large rate increases in certain years, or if you want to have lower rate increases over a prolonged period of time, it allows for this to happen. So now let's get into the details. I know we talked about that was pretty detailed actually, but let's get a little bit deeper to understand it. So what we have here are yield curves for Treasury bonds and muni bonds. And we have multiple muni curves because muni rates are a function of the borrower's credit rating, unlike WIFIA, which were a function of the weighted average life of the loan. Our interest rate is a function of the weighted average life of the WIFIA loan. So we've included the curves that correspond to certain ratings between BBB and AA. You'll see them on the graphic here. And note that I do want to note that because of the nature of the market, these rates change on a regular basis, on almost a daily basis. They can change quite frequently. So what I'm showing here are approximations. But the delta that is shown between the treasuries and the munis is pretty darn close to what you're going to see today in the marketplace. And these deltas, they grow during times of uncertainty. For instance, during times of a pandemic. And if you are also a lower rated borrower, let's say you're in the BBB space, your interest rate benefit becomes even larger. So what we're really focusing on here are the spaces between the lower green line, the treasury, and the muni curves, which are in blue. And now as we go out into the future, into that gray box, we see the space starting to widen between the yields of munis, widen even more between the munis and the treasuries. And this occurs because of supply and demand. Buyers for muni bonds like to trade in this 30-year window, causing there to be a liquidity premium when you start to go into out years, post 30 years. And note that the muni curves in the box, these are extrapolations on what the yield would be for these bonds. And these extrapolations are based off of third-party market research as well as WIFIA research. And you'll note that treasury bond yields flatline beyond 30 years because there's still a high demand. These instruments are still, there's no liquidity premium for these securities. That's what I should say. There's still high demand and there's still supply for these instruments. So you don't see the liquidity premium that you're seeing in the munis, which causes that space to expand. And the key takeaway here is really that, borrowers seeking long-term financing for large infrastructure investment will see significant interest rate savings from a WIFIA loan. And this savings will intensify during times of larger uncertainty. And that's exactly why you're seeing these large deltas between these curves. I wanted to put this up as a way to really drive home this point. These are some recent closings here at the WIFIA program from May all the way to August 2020. And the lowest rate here is actually recently in August 2020 of 1.16%. So you'll note that, and we're looking at both subordinate and senior WIFIA obligations here. So you'll note you can note pretty easily that the program is offering very attractive interest rates. So I just wanted to put that up there to drive home this point. So let's now take a look at how WIFIA's draw schedule can also provide savings. And here we have a WIFIA loan on top and a bond financing on the bottom, and they're financing the same amount, $90 million in capital expenditures. Now, construction costs. When you look at this, you're going to take some time to look at the graphic, but you'll see when you look at that legend that construction costs are just under $20 million, and they're being incurred each year for 5 years. Now, the bond in year one is issuing the full amount, along with amounts needed to pay capitalized interest during the construction period. This way, the borrower is not, if they issue enough to pay capitalized interest during the construction period, the borrower does not need to make debt service payments during construction. But what do you do with these excess bond amounts that aren't needed for construction costs or capitalized interest? Well, those amounts are being invested. They're not simply sitting there. These borrowers are savvy. You guys are savvy, and you're putting them into short-term investments. But the problem is that the yield on these short-term investments is actually lower than the interest expense associated with the long-term debt, resulting in what we talked about, negative arbitrage. And that causes and it's that negative arbitrage impact that causes the bond's outstanding balance at year 5, the year of debt service commencement, to be greater than the WIFIA loan's outstanding balance at debt service commencement. And that's what this graphic is really trying to show. Take a look at year 5, and you'll see how the bond balance at debt service commencement is actually larger. And that's because of this negative arbitrage impact. So let's put together what we've discussed and work through an example. The graph above is a bond financing for 100% of project costs. The graph below is a bond financing for 51%, with WIFIA taking on the 49% of project costs. Now, we discussed how construction costs are incurred at intervals throughout the construction period, and you may close on a WIFIA loan prior to construction beginning and make WIFIA draws as needed up to 1 year post construction completion, substantial completion. And since WIFIA costs you nothing if it is not drawn, borrowers that are able to lock in WIFIA's interest rate on day 1 and delay drawing on the loan until close to construction completion will not accrue any interest related to the WIFIA loan during construction. And in this example, the graph above, in light blue, you're seeing the additional bond premium that'll be incurred with the 100% bond financing. And it's greater than what you see below. And that's because the bond that is paired with WIFIA, it's 51% of the size of the bond above. And here the key takeaway is that there is no additional cap I tacked on to the WIFIA loan because the borrower has managed construction costs accordingly and is able to make one draw on the WIFIA loan close to substantial completion or at completion going forward, or at substantial completion. And going forward, the overall debt service amount in this scenario will also be lower because of the lower interest rate associated with the WIFIA obligation. So 2 points there. You're incurring less cap I during construction, and once you draw on the WIFIA loan, you're going to have a lower interest rate associated with the WIFIA loan. So your debt service payments going forward are going to be lower. And this type of approach, where you're bringing in WIFIA very close to substantial completion, you're utilizing cheaper short-term debt, or simply using the 51% of bond financing to pay your construction costs early on. It's been utilized by a variety of our borrowers. Even in the first round, Orange County Water District, which was part of our first set of loans, they issued very cheap short-term debt during construction and used WIFIA to take out those short-term notes at substantial completion. And this greatly reduced capitalized interest that would have accrued on the WIFIA loan if it was drawn day 1. So now let's get to the savings. That's a lot to unpack, but let's get to what the savings are going to be when we look at the interest rate benefits and the avoidance of negative arbitrage. And let's look at the undiscounted stack. So not looking at present value, we're simply looking at undiscounted savings from the WIFIA loan. The expected savings you would see utilizing the attractive interest rate and avoiding negative arbitrage, the expected savings would be around 10% of the project funding amount. So if your project funding was, let's say, 100 million, we're looking at about 10 million in savings because you utilize the WIFIA instrument. So let's go a little bit further and talk about, we got to talk about the final savings feature we introduced in the beginning, which was sculpting. And we see a similar setup. We see a similar setup as the graph as the previous graphic I showed with the two bar charts. We have 100% bond financing on top, and the bottom chart shows the scenario where WIFIA is 49% of the funding amount. And we also see that WIFIA reaches financial close in year 1, and there's a commitment in place through substantial completion. The commitment is indicated by these dashed lines. And at substantial completion, the WIFIA loan is fully drawn. Now, here's where things start to change. You'll notice the bond financing in the lower graph has a shorter tenor. It matures in year 28. And when you turn your attention to the WIFIA loan, in the same bottom graph, you'll notice that debt balances are staying steady all the way through year 28, the year when the bond financing matures, it exits. And what is happening here is the borrower is taking advantage of our customizable repayment schedule. They're sculpting the WIFIA loan around other debt, allowing more expensive bond financing to be paid down even sooner, while allowing the WIFIA principal balance to remain steady until after the bond financing is off the books. The WIFIA loan then amortizes as you would expect. Another key takeaway here is that the more expensive bond financing, when you take this type of approach and you use things like payment deferral, interest only, you sculpt repayment so higher principal payments are backloaded in the WIFIA repayment schedule, you shorten the 51% bond financing, and what do? You make it cheaper. The tenor has been effectively shortened, so you also see lower negative arbitrage, and you'll also see a lower amount of interest expense associated with this bond. So now let's take a look at how those have impacted your savings. Well, you'll see that, I've listed out the sculpting impact, the negative arbitrage sculpting impact in light blue, and the sculpting impact on the interest rate in this green shade. And we've gone from a savings of around 10 million, I'm looking at the undiscounted, to about around 13 million. Again, assuming 100 million project funding amount, total project funding amount. So it's a significant, it does supplement your savings significantly if you can really take advantage of WIFIA sculpting feature and get the more expensive bond financing for the project paid off quicker, or have the tenor shortened so the interest rate is lower. Well, I know that's a lot to unpack. I think, with the slides, if you go through those graphics and the bullet points, hopefully that all rings clear. Of course, feel free to contact the WIFIA program if you do have questions about the slides. We are able to meet with prospective borrowers prior to submissions of your letters of interest. You can feel free to send requests to WIFIA at epa.gov. The meetings will be done via video conference. They'll be limited to 1 hour. But here we can also answer some questions you may have, whether it be about benefits, eligibility requirements, how to structure your project, etc. So do take advantage of this as well. It's extremely helpful. Some additional resources. I always tell folks, look at our website. Our website is full of good information, whether it's about the application, the NOFA, the process, credit processing fees, etc. It's an excellent resource. Also, the application materials are on our website. You'll find the letter of interest. You'll find samples of certain key items that'll be included in the letter of interest. So do take advantage of that resource. And if you find it easier simply to contact us, again, email WIFIA at epa.gov, and we can be sure to direct you to the right information you need, whether it's on our website or we can simply answer them on a phone call or by video conference. And that is the presentation. Please do let me know if you have any questions. Summit team, I'm unable to see the questions clearly in my little box here. So if you don't mind saying them aloud, so I can hear the question and then I can respond, that'd be appreciated.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely go through the questions. Before we get into the questions, we actually have some poll questions. If you guys don't mind participating in them, gives us a little bit of a better idea about the prospective borrowers. So I'll launch those polls while you guys are adding questions to the chat.
Apologies for that, Caleb. I should have prompted the question, but thanks for catching it.
No worries. Thanks, everyone, for participating in the poll questions. One of the preliminary questions we often receive is whether the webinar is recorded and whether the slides, people or participants will get copies of the slides. We actually sent out the copies of the slides yesterday, and if you didn't receive those, I can send those out to anybody who reaches out. And also a recording with closed captioning of the webinar is also uploaded to the WIFIA website approximately 2 to 3 weeks after the webinar takes place. And Amit, the first question is, does the WIFIA program encompass any principal forgiveness?
The short answer is no. And I think that's that's the answer. I can't add anything else to it. We don't do that.
Sure. Are water districts considered eligible borrowers?
Most definitely, yes.
If you are a local government water supplier, should you apply through SRF?
Well, if you're ineligible, if the project is eligible, you have the choice, and I won't be able to advise whether to go the SRF route or the WIFIA route. Both are great programs. What I can say is that a lot of borrowers take advantage of both programs. They have SRF financing and they have WIFIA financing. So if you need to get the full project funded and the SRF is not providing 100% of funding, then consider adding WIFIA to your sources of funding. But if SRF is funding 100% of the project, maybe that's the easier way to go because all of your funding has been secured. But I would need to know more details, and I would also have to be your financial advisor to guide you on that. But do keep open the option for co-funding with WIFIA and SRF if SRF is not sufficient for meeting all of your funding needs.
Are Superfund sites eligible?
When it comes to Superfund sites and eligibility, this is something that, we actually have a team at WIFIA that works on these things. Eligibility is not something that I dog. I lead. So the way to address this and for you to get a very firm and clear answer is to actually email WIFIA, the WIFIA email box, wifia@epa.gov, and there will be program management experts who can clearly answer that question. And they'll probably ask for more details about the project, but they can give you a very firm understanding of whether or not it's eligible. And I think that's the route to go. We want to make sure you're very clear on whether or not that project is in fact eligible.
And a follow-up question to that, can WIFIA funding go to an entity that is conducting remediation on a CER/CLA Superfund site?
Yeah, I'll give the same answer. I don't have enough information, and I probably don't have the expertise to give you, an answer where I'm 100% confident. The way to address this question is really email the WIFIA@epa.gov inbox and have a program management expert address this question. And it'll probably require an email with additional information or a phone call to make sure they understand all the details of that project before they give you a firm yes or no on eligibility.
On slide 17, what is the date of the yield curves?
Gosh, I don't, it's probably middle of July. I don't have the exact date. They are a little bit outdated, but what you can do, and this is how I checked them this morning actually to make sure they weren't too off the mark. The Emma website actually they make available publicly the AAA rated muni curves. And if you're familiar with, the adjustments needed to move from AAA to lower rating categories, you can make approximations for the yield curves for lower rated entities. And as for the Treasury bonds, those will be on the slgs.gov website. And there'll be some slight variation in those curves. As I mentioned during my presentation, these curves fluctuate. But you'll be able to get the latest and greatest and do a similar analysis that I performed in my presentation, and you will see the deltas.
What are the WIFIA application and credit processing fees? Do you have a schedule that can be shared?
Well, the WIFIA application fee, you'll learn more about this on our website, but When you are invited to submit an application, you submit an LOI, you get selected, you get the LOI gets selected, you get invited to apply to come in with an application, a WIFIA application. There's a fee that's part of that application. It's $100,000. So that has to be submitted along with your application for us to begin our due diligence and negotiations. And then at the end, there's a credit processing fee, which is typically around, it's around $250,000. I'd say it's for legal, engineering, and financial advisors. And financial and legal, sometimes they're not used. So the fees can really vary depending on the complexity of the project. Less complex products, we may not bring in financial advisors and engineering advisors. You may see a very small credit processing fee. With more complex projects, maybe you'll see that full $270K, close to closing. There's no schedule to share. There's something hard and fast. This is simply the $270K that I mentioned is simply an approximation, and it's based off of past precedents. When you look at our portfolio of closed loans, this is where that credit processing fee has usually lied. So expect 100K and then the 270K credit processing fee.
We obtain SRF funding from our state. Is this a loan that we can apply for in addition to?
In addition to WIFIA loan, I'm assuming. Certainly. And we definitely encourage it. There is an 80% federal assistance limit, but my understanding, I've worked with a variety of SRFs, is that they're able to not utilize the capitalization grants when funding these WIFIA projects, and it helps avoid this 80% federal assistance limit. So, speak to your SRF folks, and do try to take advantage of this co-funding opportunity, where WIFIA and SRF come in together to help, make up, a large portion of your project funding. It's encouraged, and it would be beneficial from an interest rate, from a cost savings perspective.
Is funding required to come from multiple sources? Could a project be 100% WIFIA funded?
This goes back to the 80% federal assistance limit. There's two limits really. There's that, but even before you get to that, you have the 49%. We're prohibited from funding more than 49% of project costs. The goal of WIFIA is to supplement capital markets debt for these very good projects, but we're limited to 49% of the project funding amount. So we would never be able to fund 100%.
What happens if you are fortunate enough to complete a project under budget? Can the amount of the WIFIA loan be adjusted when completed?
Well, if you are completing a project under budget, there's cost savings. So the adjustments to the WIFIA loan, I guess, would be a reduction in the fines potentially. Maybe that's where this individual is going. When we close the WIFIA loan together, we negotiate the loan, and we the borrower and the program reach financial close. It's based off of anticipated eligible project costs, and we made our best estimate on what these costs are going to be. And if there are minor fluctuations in the project cost, whether it be less or more expensive, that's understandable. And if you guys did a great job and you guys were able to reduce costs by a degree, that's totally fine. The WIFIA loan would not have to be adjusted. You would retain that funding amount. And if you didn't want to utilize the funding amount, you wouldn't have to disperse the amounts. And there's also a prepayment option as well. a prepayment option with no penalty. But totally your call to do it.
When seeking a disbursement, about how long does it take EPA staff to review, process, and send the payment to the borrower?
Approximately 2 weeks.
Is there an ideal cost size for a program that EPA would like to see?
No, but when you go on our website, you'll see a list of, these objectives for the program, and that'll help you identify what things we're really trying to target. We're making our selections, but the size, if you look at our portfolio projects, they range from close to $1 billion to 20 million. They're all over the place. And we're really targeting, it's not about cost, it's about good projects that meet that meet our objectives. So size is definitely not something that we're going to be selecting based off of. Caleb, how many more questions do we have here? I gotta run to
some of these might
quite a few.
Answer via email. Yeah, there's a good amount of questions left.
Well, let's do maybe 2 more. I got to run to other meetings here. I don't want to be. Let's see. Let's do a few more, Caleb, and then let's move to email responses. So
I was thinking the same.
We don't have to be
answered via email.
Okay.
Can you use WIFIA for dredging river that is causing a problem for a water plant intake?
I see no reason why not, but again, we would need to understand more of the details around this project, and I would email the WIFIA.epa.gov website and speak to a program management specialist, because they will ask you the right questions and they'll give you a clear understanding on eligibility.
Is funding always at 49%?
No, it actually could be less. There are borrowers that they secured, they've secured very cheap financing. Whether they're using short-term notes or using cash. They have some existing bond money. So I've seen it go below 49% in some cases, but the maximum we could go to is 49%, and that's typically, it's a great product. It's a cheap product, so people really try to take advantage of. They try to get as much WIFIA money into the project as possible. So it's usually 49%. It's usually maxed out.
And one last question before we end. Are electric utilities that are complying with EPA's CCR rule for ash pond removal a possible candidate for WIFIA funding?
I don't. From the way it's been presented, I don't think so. But there may be some details I'm not understanding, and we need to have these types of questions. We need to have a conversation, and we need to understand more about the project and see if it fits within what we're permitted to finance under our statute. So again, please email the program and speak to a legal expert or a program management expert, so you can work through that project and see if you are indeed eligible.
So I think we're going to take the rest of the questions and email the question askers individually, just to save a bit of time.
Okay. That sounds that sounds like a plan. If I think yeah, that sounds like a great plan, Caleb.
Great. Well, we thank everybody for participating, and we hope that you gained some knowledge out of this webinar. As a reminder, the webinar slides were sent out yesterday. If you didn't receive them, you can reach out directly to us to receive those, and a recording of the webinar will be available about 2 to 3 weeks post today.
Thank you very much.